Last summer, we took this amazing road trip. If you're friends with us on Facebook, you were probably inundated with pictures of our family and weird locations throughout North America. It was an international road trip, even, because we went into Canada, the most international place in the world. And we went to the most foreign part of Canada, Quebec. We crossed our first border as a family. We even had to surrender some mace that we had brought because we needed to fend off bears in Yosemite. So we had mace, and they asked us, "Do you have mace?" And we were like, "Yeah, we have mace." So we had to go on and sign a form. So the most polite border guard you've ever met. And once we did that, we started driving to Montreal.
We crossed over the border, and I was instantly struck by how beautiful the farmland is in Montreal. So we're driving through this beautiful hillside with the rolling hills and the quaint little red barns. And then these street signs start popping up on the terrain. And the first thing that really hit me was they were in French. The closer we got to the city, the streets got busier, and there were more and more street signs, and I could read none of them. So I felt my anxiety rise because we're in this foreign place, and I don't know where we are, and I don't know how we'll navigate if we can't find our way by reading the signs. But then I remembered Dave took 3 years of French in high school.
I had taken 3 years of French in high school. Unfortunately, I only passed 2 of them. See, I took the third one because there was this girl that I really wanted to sit next to, and it obviously didn't work out because it wasn't her. And so anyway, we got into Montreal, and we started looking for a place to park so that we could explore the old town of Montreal. And so we started looking for parking, and they have these electronic parking signs, throughout the city. It's very nice, except they're in French. And but to resolve these electronic parking signs, I had to interpret. I had to guess what they meant by the context. And so I used my logical, rational skills to deduce, because there were several different garages, and they would have, on the sign, the name of the garage, and next to it, a number. And then there would be some garages that didn't have a number next to them. They had this word next to them, ouvert. So I deduced that the numbers next to the names meant the number of spots available in the garage, and that ouvert meant full. So we ended up parking on the street somewhere, and I found out just how wrong I was when we went into a McDonald's that had a sign in the window that said, "Ouvert, 24 hours a day." So after exploring the old part of the city, we got back into the car and went to go find the place that we were staying for that night.
So if you back up a couple of months, I've been looking for places for us to stay as we traveled across the country on a somewhat limited budget. So we had stayed with a lot of friends, we had stayed in a few hotels and a lot of campgrounds. But when I looked at Montreal, we didn't know anyone there, and it's very expensive. So I found this big Presbyterian church in downtown Montreal. I emailed the pastor and asked if we could camp in the fellowship hall of the church just for the night. And he responded right away, and he said we couldn't stay there due to some insurance complications, but that we were welcome to stay with he and his wife in the manse. So back to our current story, where we finally navigate this strange city, and in the middle of these buildings and busy roads, find this little green courtyard with these adorable little brownstones and the flowers in the windowsill. And we're standing on the doorstep of the manse. Now, we've never met them, and I've never felt quite so much like a foreigner in this strange city. But then I started thinking about this pastor and his wife. They've never met us, and they're about to welcome us into their home. All they knew about us was what they had read in the emails I had sent. We could have been crazy. We could have been lying, but we were definitely strangers. And that's where we found ourselves on the doorstep that day.
We grow up being taught about stranger danger. And we teach our kids how to be safe around strangers. Just this morning we were talking about the children's sermon, and Megan was like, can you please not tell the kids to introduce themselves to strangers? That would be a really bad thing, right? Didn't get a laugh, it's scary. And I think it's only natural to be skeptical and suspicious of people we don't know. I think that's part of our DNA deep down. And for me, nothing makes me more suspicious than a friendly stranger. I'm like, okay, back off, brother. I don't want what you're selling. So I'm always waiting for the sales pitch.
And I think we're also hesitant with strangers sometimes because our lives are very full. Adding someone else to our table or to our list of appointments or to our Christmas shopping list just frankly feels a little overwhelming.
And our passage today is from the book of Deuteronomy. You just heard it. And since we're not doing a series on Deuteronomy, I just want to give you a little background refresher. Deuteronomy consists of 3 sermons given by Moses to the people of Israel before they went in to the promised land. And so now remember that Israel had been slaves in Egypt for many generations, and then Moses was sent by God to rescue them from Egypt, and he did. But they weren't quite ready to be fully free. So God led them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and that gave the first generation time to die off and forget, because they've been raised in slavery, and it taught those that survived how to depend on God for everything. So they received the law, they fought many battles, and then finally they came to the edge of the land that God had promised them. And before they went in, Moses reminded them of everything they needed to know before they went in without him.
So what are those key things that Moses highlights? Well, Moses reminds them to love God. They've talked a lot about that as they've wandered, but Moses is reminding them of the most important things. So Moses reminds them to love God. Moses reminds them to hold fast to their faith. That's what got them through the wilderness, and that's what will sustain them in the promised land. Moses also reminds them to love the stranger, that they're about to go into their new home, that this will be their home turf, but that they were strangers once too, that they need to not get too comfortable and forget what it was like to be alone or to be lost. God is calling them to welcome the stranger. And God is calling us to do that too.
In a way, what God is calling the people to do in the book of Deuteronomy is to focus on their circle of influence instead of their circle of concern. So we talked about last week. He's calling them to remember what is important and to cling to that. But focusing on the circle of influence doesn't mean that we can't also expand it. In fact, expanding that circle is exactly what our scripture passage is calling us to do today. God calls us to expand our circle of influence to include strangers. I think the best way that we can do that is to remember that we were strangers once too. It's hard to be a stranger, isn't it? When I looked up the word that is used in Deuteronomy for stranger, the commentary talked about how a stranger would have no rights. A stranger wasn't the danger, a stranger was in danger. So by including them in their circle of influence, Israel wasn't simply being nice, but providing something essential. And that's what we're called to do too. We're called to expand our circles of influence to include strangers, because strangers don't have the same rights that we do in our communities. They don't have the same access to community. They don't have the same access to information. They don't have the same access to being a part of a genuine community.
Now, many of you have been practicing this with me over the past few Sundays. 6 years ago, I was co-pastoring here with Dave, and then left to pastor another congregation. So coming back over the past few Sundays, for some of us, it's been simply getting reacquainted, like old friends. But some of you are strangers. Some of you have come since I left, and you've heard about this mysterious wife that you thought may or may not actually exist. People have assured you was real. And some of you who I've never met before have taken the opportunity to go out of your comfort zone and reach out and greet me and introduce yourselves. But our purpose in the text today is not a call to be nice to Megan, while I appreciate that. Our purpose in the text today is that God is calling you to welcome the stranger. Each day you're presented with opportunities to do this. Maybe it's that person sitting at the dinner table with you at a party and you've never met them. Maybe it's that checker who's there every week at the grocery store, but you've never asked their name. Or that person in the doctor's office sitting next to you as you both wait forever for the doctor to come. Maybe it's that child who's visiting their grandparents for the weekend and seems a little lost. Maybe it's strangers all the time. And it's risky, and it's uncomfortable, and it's outside of our comfort zone. But God is calling you to reach out to them as friends. God is calling you to expand your circle of influence and love the stranger. Oh, the bulletin today. The bulletin today has these blue cards. And I've been told that that line after the sermon title says invitation to discipleship. And it's one way that we respond to the sermon. If you look on there, there's a little box, and it says, my next step today is to engage a stranger in conversation this week. That might be your first step, and it's a scary one, and it's a big one, but that might be your first step to responding to God's call to love the stranger, is to check that box. And sometime between now and next Sunday, when God puts someone in front of you who you've never met, you reach out and you greet them.
This is something that we are called to do outside. And it's also something that we do right here in this room. Many of you here were a stranger not too long ago. And you came here, and hopefully you were welcomed. And then welcomed again during our foreign signature 20-minute-long passing of the peace. And we as a church are called to welcome strangers here too. We've been in the wonderful position for the past month or two of having more new people in church than we actually know what to do with. And so welcoming strangers can't just be a job that we kind of farm out to the deacons and the elders and the greeters. Welcoming strangers, expanding our circle of influence, isn't just something we're called to do out there. It's not just something that we do in our personal lives. It's something that we do here together on Sunday mornings. We come here not just to see one another. We come not just to get fed. We come to serve. And this very particular calling to expand our circles of influence by engaging strangers in conversation is something that everyone here needs to be a part of. In the world, but also right here and right now.
That night in Montreal, we stood on that doorstep and we knocked on the door, and the pastor and his wife opened the door to their home. Now they looked normal and we looked sort of normal, and they welcomed us in. And those first few minutes after we shook hands and exchanged names and introduction, it was pretty awkward.
But by the end of it, we were friends. And we're friends still. We're friends on Facebook. We comment on each other's lives from a great distance. But we engage regularly. And if it wasn't so far away, we'd probably have a regular dinner together and not run out of things to talk about. All because they welcome strangers. Deuteronomy 10 says that God, who is mighty and awesome, shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love the strangers too, for you yourselves were strangers once. Amen.